right. Hi, everyone.
What's up,
Welcome
guys?
to episode
Happy
number 8.
Wednesday. Yeah, episode 8 of our TG Security Squad show. I love it.
We're almost in the double digits. That's
I know, right?
it's an
Baby
accomplishment.
steps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're kind of back to our normally scheduled Wednesdays here, so that's great.
It's now forever ingrained on my calendar. Don't worry.
You're welcome, Brian. Had
I
to put
think
that block
between
out
all of
for you.
us, something pops up and it just happens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it never ends, right? There's always some put out, but at least we're trying to be consistent here, so that's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I think we have a pretty good amount of topics to jump over this week. This hasn't been a quiet week at all, and just like everything else, right? I think first up we have another interesting, attack around Honeywell. A little bit of IoT there. Quite interesting from that regard. From a, what we've seen in other vendors like solar supply chain, right? And if you think about someone like Honeywell, they make a lot of stuff, right? I mean, for home automation, offices, it's still interesting kind of where things are going and, who and what's being targeted out there with ransomware exploits, things of that nature and what we're seeing in the marketplace. And, it's kind of funny, right? If you think about like, just like a house perspective, if like, you have like your refrigerator system, all these, IoT devices at your house. And, now we're getting companies being targeted around that space. Pretty soon it'll be like, hey, if you want to get food out of your refrigerator, insert ransom coins to like, get a Diet Coke or something out of it. So we'll see how these things kind of, play out with these types of deals.
Yeah. I am curious myself to see if there was any kind of, if they got themselves in any kind of code base or if they're basically installed any kind of backdoor. Because as of now, Honeywell reported no material impact.
Right.
So I wonder, and the amount of damages may not have been the requirement to report, so that could be a part of it. But they said it seems to be no data exfiltration of any kind. So it makes me wonder if this is possibly maybe like a denial of service attack, and what was maybe even the intent of this kind of attack. But it did sound like, if they had compromised systems, they at least had decent segmentation, because if there was no exfiltration of data, then that's a good sign.
Yeah, I think the other interesting thing, Honeywell's is really known in the aerospace and the energy manufacturing type of equipment that they do. And so when you start digging into like supply chain to the government, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another big piece of the pie. Like, what are they really after and which direction are they trying to go with that, right? So after just doing my CMMC-RP, the registered practitioner, that's something that really comes to my mind now is, are they trying to break in through that way to do something through another back door?
Yeah, one thing that was also interesting in the article was that they called upon Microsoft to kind of come help and look at it. So I'm just wondering if there's some maybe lingering issues from what we've seen in the other attacks and potential suspects of hey, was this another potential compromised Exchange server or whatnot from the other various 0 days we have out there. So yeah, to your point, Brian, I mean it brings up the whole supply chain because as these vendors are deep and wide in government and other facilities, it makes you really think.
Well, are we going to find out all this traces back to SolarWinds at some day?
Yeah.
I mean, I know they're denying it now, but at some point, did they get more code base than we really know?
Do all roads lead to SolarWinds? Right?
Well, it seems like just the timeline of events coming into 2021 has really everything's kind of really heated up since that event, right? And I've just seen so many more. The frequency of breaches have been tremendously more after that. So whether or not they're related is still to be seen. But I think we will find that they will be linked quite closely in the future when some of these reports keep coming out.
Yep, exactly. I think next up we had which one was it? Was it the revenge hacking one? I think we had on our agenda.
Yeah, the consultant on the Carlsbad.
That was interesting because I read that article and really understood that this guy left he's fired from his contract, goes back to his home country, and then comes back to the United States, and that's when he got arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Was kind of interesting from that. And then the other thing too is like 0.05% of these cyber crimes actually get prosecuted. So I think that's why you see these things pop up in the media as well, is because such a low
Yeah.
percentage of
Yeah.
people are prosecuted. Pretty much everyone that pops up, you do see.
Mm-hmm.
I find it interesting too. Like it was 1,500 company employee in
Mhm.
Carlsbad, yet they don't name the company
Right.
Right.
that's in
In our
there. So
backyard there, right? So
that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it definitely shows how serious the ramifications are on both ends of the spectrum when it comes to cyber-related crime. It's like from the company's end, this kind of attack made them inoperable for, I think it was 2 days, and then the aftermath or the residual effects were felt for
yeah,
a couple weeks after. But from the consultant's perspective, right, you're talking about 2 years in prison, $500,000, about I think it was 3 years house arrest afterwards, and he doesn't even live in the United States technically, or he's not from here. I mean,
yeah,
that's wild to see, but probably justified given the damages that it caused the company.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of like there's a more of a Yelp review gone horribly wrong. Like you kind of read through it, it's like, hey,
Yeah.
company B, they didn't potentially, or something happened, or just didn't quite check out, and then they probably just told somebody like hey, maybe I want a different engineer or contractor, which happens, right? I mean, sometimes personalities just don't vibe and mix, and you kind of bring in different people and talent, and this person took it very personal and very quickly seriously escalated the situation, and just basically was kind of like, well, like watch this, like I'll show you guys type of thing, and just wiped out these accounts and put this company in a bad situation. Moving, I think to your point, is the good news is there was at least some backups there. They're able to kind of recover some data and move things along. But it's just a very very tricky situation of someone getting pissed off and making a decision, and now they're kind of facing the penalties here. A little bit different than kind of what we're talking about with like true like revenge level hacking, but this is more of a disgruntled kind of type of attack, really, is the way I see it, the admin kind of thing. So yeah, unfortunate.
Yeah, it's a key point to make sure that you have those offboarding processes, right? There's high likelihood or high chance that it was a service account or something like that that was leveraged, that the password was never changed to.
Right.
It probably didn't have the two-factor
Mhm.
enabled on it, and then he was able to gain access post the contract to be able to get in. So having those onboarding and offboarding procedures documented, and then having those accounts locked down that can't be accessed from the outside, if for whatever reason they don't need to have 2FA or can't have 2FA.
Yeah.
That's where the application keys and things like that come into play. And then finally, those backups, they're so critical to being able to recover back quickly. In Office 365, I think people forget a lot that it's a shared responsibility, right? Once you
Mm-hmm.
delete that mailbox, sure, you can at least get it back for the 30 days. But when a lot of times the damage is done and you don't realize it within that 30-day period to retrieve it. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I forget what the timeline was from when it was executed to when they kind of were able to get back online, but it's very well that could have cost them some data. And honestly, it's just addresses how important it is to have policies and procedures in place which address how the business will operate and how communications will take place in a major event like this or a major outage. And having that established, documented, having like a single source of truth, and automatically identifying necessary stakeholders, and then providing some kind of secondary channel for communication for your vendors makes it so that in these kind of events, it's you're still operable, right? You're not completely out of touch with your clients. So a lot of lessons to be learned out of this one, and I would love to be a fly on the wall with how he kind of was able to do that. And like you said, Brian, if they forgot to recycle his account or turn off his his access.
Yeah, because if you look at the timelines, right, it was like I think it was 2017 or so is when it looks like things were done, and then 2018 is kind of when things got deleted, so to speak. So like to your point, there was a good gap in there of, hey, transition. Okay, this third party company migrated me, cool. Now I'm going to go through and wipe their accounts or change their service accounts they used. I'm sure that there were still some, not necessarily, but just, accounts that weren't really cleaned up, things like that. So makes it tough. All right. What do we have next? The phishing.
Yeah, the
Our
California
favorite.
State Controller's Office that got phished.
Yeah, that was interesting. Oh, go ahead.
What are your thoughts on that one, Sam?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting just because it was a marred and a little bit of controversy. Because the SCO or the state office, the California State Controller's Office, had notified the CDT, or the California Department of Technology, about the attack, and they basically had reported that, I think it was, the CDT established a new set of guidelines that effectively required all executives, managers, and supervisors to know all the details of phishing exercises before they occur. And that would actually end up being, I think, the primary issue in this case, because it seemed like a high individual with a high level of privileged access was compromised, and therefore they were able to get access to thousands of workers' social security numbers and email contents and whatnot. And so the real controversy here is should that standard be in place to begin with, and is that possibly the reason that they got compromised? Because I'm sure our viewers are sick of hearing about it every time we get on, but phishing is just something that keeps coming up, and it continues to be a prevalent attack vector. And in this case, by not requiring executives, managers, and supervisors to undergo regular security awareness training with employees, you're basically intentionally widening your attack surface and assuming that these individuals, some of whom have no working relationship to technology, are actually knowledgeable of modern social engineering attacks and how to avoid them. And because these things are constantly evolving and becoming more sophisticated, that likelihood is quite low, unless they're, an individual who likes to read up on these types of things on their weekends. But unless you're me, or you, or Derek, that's probably not going to happen. So omitting that piece of that requirement training creates really high risk situations, and I think that's what we saw here.
Yeah, I think something
Yeah.
interesting too in the article is that they got into their Office 365 environment with that credential, and so any documents that were shared with that individual are assumed compromised.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing to consider too when you're sharing files, is to use those expiration dates if it's something that they don't need to have persistent access to help reduce that type of spread of environments. Just something else to kind of throw out there to consider.
Yeah. I think it kind of also comes back to a couple different core things. To your point, we kind of constantly harp on, but are there. It's MFA and things like that. Even the basics. And I think the comment about the hey, knowing we're phishing exercising, or knowing we're doing this testing, and getting people to like, hey, I quote unquote passed my exercise, I'm done. Like, no, like you can't do that anymore. Like, keep it kind of tight. Really know, and it should be a constant thing. Is like, I know it's kind of this annoyance sometimes for some users, but these things happen, and it's just super important. And the type of access you can get access to, and like where they got access to specific targeted workers. I think it was like 9,000 or something like that, and then kind of use that as a campaign to target with spear phishing. The chances of success on that one, and so again, these are just like, we see so many of these in the news now with ransomware, phishing, MFA. It's like kind of three common core things we're constantly seeing here. So it just like, I want to say it shouldn't surprise me, but it doesn't, that we're still seeing these things happen on a often basis, as we are in 2021 so far, with everything going on.
Yeah, I just think those things are often viewed as, things like security awareness training are often viewed as kind of like mundane activities, right, and maybe even unessential activities in the mind of some. And as a result, you create a situation where the individuals with the highest degree of privilege often have the lowest level of threat awareness. And then when you combine it with a lack of maturity in either your email policies and procedures slash security gateway or your general employee awareness, that's how these things happen. And that the problem with this situation is that the state controller's office is just, they have access to a tremendous amount of sensitive data. So it makes you wonder, why aren't these institutions getting scrutinized more heavily for their security practices, and it's having a higher degree of I guess emphasis placed on the maturity.
Yeah.
So let me
Well,
ask you,
it's
like, this kind of a little bit side topic here, but like, in these large governments and kind of local, entities, do you think it makes sense for them to kind of take on these security tasks themselves internally, or like really kind of partner with like, quote unquote industry experts, and I don't want to say outsource everything, but kind of leverage more of an industry expert to help secure these types of things?
I certainly think a hybrid model would probably be a solid approach, because like in the world of finance, diversification allows you to mitigate risk. That some of that can actually be applied here, not to mention the expertise of the individuals you have in-house may not be as high or to the degree of the expertise of somebody who spends all day every day focusing on a particular facet of the industry.
Right.
And as a result, it often becomes better in certain situations to go with the vendor. However, depending on the nature of the data, you may find that keeping it within your own infrastructure allows you to kind of set up security controls around it that are of a higher standard than perhaps something that's in the shared responsibility model or located in the cloud. So I think it really depends, but if from long story short, I think a hybrid approach to that is always going to be best, depending on what aptitudes and capabilities you have in-house.
I think it
Yeah.
helps to train them up too in the hybrid model, right? So you bring
Mhm.
that expertise in from consultants that go around to different verticals, different industries, and they can bring all that knowledge together and then help grow that team internally and take it as a hybrid type of approach for sure.
Yeah, and particularly once a company really starts to mature, I think looking to vendors to really take your program to the next level is quite efficient, because again, it circles back to that, how much can you really invest into your own security team to build out your own red team or your own blue team that's
Right.
at an extremely high level. Oftentimes it becomes better to have somebody who can operate it to a certain level, get it to a certain standard, and then to take it to that next level to really get the bells and whistles and to fine tune and have a proactive model. It can be best to bring in a third party company, of course, with their own, in line with your own vendor management program, and ensuring, of course, that they comply with all of your guys' internal policies and procedures, because that often, as we're seeing today, is a huge issue that we're running into, is the risk created by vendors and people with access to the environment.
Definitely.
There's no kind of silver bullet there, so it's like you said, it's it should be a constantly evolving type of thing. And I'm always just kind of curious, as government and kind of sees more of the risk around cybersecurity, how policies and procedures and things like that are going to change over the next 6, 12, 18 months on making things tighter, or stricter policies around reporting or and things like that, and training, even interesting stuff.
Yeah, and just to end it, a quick note to end it on is, I think what we'll probably start to see happen is, once these kind of, maybe a few organizations will start to really shine in the world of InfoSec, where they start to kind of make or become a standard in and of themselves, and you will find that organizations will, or even government orgs, will no longer do business with or perform transactions with anybody who has not been audited, assessed, XYZ by this certain subset of companies, right? Because they have this highest level of proficiency. So I think that might be something that kind of starts that we see a lot of as well, where they have whatever they have in house, but look to a couple of these vendors to take care of certain things.
Yeah, thinking about MFA, I just gotta talk about a pet peeve before we move on to the next topic. It's
Ryan's
companies
favorite.
that charge extra to have MFA. right? There's always, oh, you can get the little entry level or the free version or the team group, whatever. But to get MFA or get SAML authentication, you
Mm.
have to pay the enterprise price. Contact us to find out what that costs. No, offer it to everybody because you're creating bad habits with people by forcing you to
It's a
have
good
to buy
point.
that enterprise version just to integrate a 2FA solution or MFA solution in.
Yeah, it should almost be just like table stakes now, like integration for any kind of type app, and it just I mean it should just be out there, right? I mean it's just so common, and I think now we're getting so ingrained with MFA, and it's constantly a topic here for a reason, right? So yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is just like reframing the mindset surrounding it. I mean, I think it should be a MFA first kind of mentality where it's like, no, you're turning it on, and if you want to disable it, then you go ahead and manually disable it. By default, MFA is on, right? That should be a mentality, but
Yeah,
we're working on it.
It's kind of like a deny any firewall and you poke holes when you need to, not the other way
Correct.
around. So it makes
Correct.
perfect sense, actually. Awesome.
Ooh, the ransomware attacks after Acer was hit with that Microsoft Exchange exploit.
Well, presumably, right? I don't think that it was official, but because I don't think that they provided like a definitive answer. However, yeah, I think a lot of people are safely assuming that somebody likely weaponized the Exchange attack, and then that's how they got access.
Yeah, I think that's the next phase in that we're seeing, right? Is that people that haven't patched or they thought they patched but it wasn't efficient are now getting hit with ransomware through those loopholes.
I think it was what 50 million, that one of the largest ones.
Yep, actually,
I've even
it's
seen up to 100 million on one.
Well, they just doubled it. So they were like, if
Oh,
you
wow.
don't pay us by March 28th, we're going to double the amount of the ransom. And by the way, they requested this all in Monero, which is cryptocurrency that has been on the rise recently and popular amongst hackers and threat actors. But yeah, so 100 million. That's what it's moved up to. Yeah.
Lovely. I'm sure that those ransomware negotiating firms can get in there and work that one. But again, don't pay it, right? Like hopefully they have backups and they're recovering and they're getting their systems back up and running without it.
I don't believe they did, because a lot of their data was posted on, and I'm not going to butcher the name, but a blog. It's called Happy Blog, and a lot of their data was posted on there, including client lists, payment form applications, and financial documents. So it seems that they didn't pay the ransom, and as a result, the data was leaked. And so I wonder what the risk analysts and their financial analysts are running in the background, deciding whether or not. I mean, it sounds like the ramifications were less than the ransom, or they just didn't want to give into the demands to create a reoccurring habit. But I think this type of thing, like Brian said, is going to be more common, because you can actually just bypass many of the steps that you would traditionally take in testing, be it the infiltration, recon, gaining access to valuable data, by simply directly attacking the organization's Exchange server. I mean, and so for that reason alone, it's definitely going to become more prevalent.
Yeah, I mean, these brings up good conversations, right? Because I mean, we always have these topics with customers too. It's like, hey, you get a $10 million ransomware or whatever. That's obviously one cost associated, but like, what's the cost you don't see, right? Reputation, brand, stock price, all these things can have massive negative impact. So you have to kind of do that assessment. It's like, okay, it's $50 million, but are we going to trust that? Hey, we're only going to lose maybe 4 or 5 million in over the next 2 years because of this, then they're going to take that risk and say, no, we're not going to pay it, and move on. And to your point, it's always this, okay, hey, I pay it, I get my data back, and then guess what? And like 6 weeks later, backdoor in the account and things like that. So to your point, it's always got to have those backups as like your last line of defense. But also, if you think about this too, I mean, Acer is a pretty large, again, manufacturer. So it goes back to the whole supply chain too. It's like, okay, what else was there potentially getting into? Was there other code, or do they inject code? Like this could be another future type of thing, just, sleeping there waiting. So always brings up these interesting kind of supply on the rise that we're seeing more and more of, actually, like Honeywell and things like that. So, yeah.
Correct. Yeah, even Ubiquiti, which I think they had a similar thing happen to them recently, except it was more destructive in nature. But before we move on to that one, because I think that's the next topic, yeah, you're absolutely right. The ransomware aspect of it is one I guess angle, one dimension, but there's no way to really verify what degree of persistent access they have, and if they were able to get into any kind of code repositories. And Acer, I don't believe, off the top of my head, I don't know if they have as many IoT devices that are being regular home IoT devices. However, with their laptops, I'm sure there's some code base there where they'd be able to have some fun with. So time will tell, and I'm curious to see what Acer will report on in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, if they get that source code, they could go after the BIOS and firmware and different things, right?
Correct.
So it'll be interesting for sure to see how that plays out, because that 50 million may have been a steal at the end of the day compared to 100 million plus that it's probably at now.
Yeah, I was reading the report here, and it's like they reported $3 billion in earnings for Q4. Not a small company as well. So,
oh, I was mistaken. They do have some IoT devices that look ripe for attackers. So, I guess they'll be having some fun in there if they
yeah.
I think
catch your microwaves, people.
Exactly, right. There's another ransomware. I think this one was the CNA one, if I recall. There it is.
Yep.
So really, this was the Phoenix crypto locker that was used. But the reason I threw this one up in this episode was to talk about that they had obviously an incident response plan that they executed, because they had a message that they put up on their website. There were people going in to start unplugging servers from the network. They were doing things to help mitigate it. And that's really the key thing that I wanted to discuss around that, is that we're seeing a theme, right? Lots of ransomware in this episode. And it comes down to being able to detect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then respond back to that incident in a timely manner to try to mitigate as much of the damage as you can. So really doing those tabletop exercises that Derek, you kind of mentioned about before, is important to dial in, and having a plan to respond back. Like, have that, maybe it's hosted somewhere else, right? Maybe you use AWS every day, so you throw up something on DigitalOcean or GCP or Azure. You have a backup website. You have that access into DNS to flip it over to be able to at least put some communication out to your customers when something like that has, and you're executing your plan, right?
Yeah, this one was, when you kind of look at the whole size of it, right? I mean, they're quite a large, company to begin with, from, state and stature. So I read it was like over 15,000 devices on the network, as well as like remote users that were essentially, locked out with crypto locker. So, this is a pretty large, just in the whole sheer size and scope. And, my guess is kind of like once it got, turned on, so to speak, and was running, it ran laterally really fast to basically take down like everything. The whole website was down. It was just really kind of, everything went dark for, a while there. So this is a pretty big one in a different type of play than, what we're talking about with, say, Acer from a, monetary perspective. But I think just from a sheer volume of, attack surface, and this one is pretty large. So it's quite scary, in my opinion, to see this on the rise.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things I was reading about is that, and I had no idea about this, but it's common for attackers to actually go after lists of companies insured by with cybersecurity insurance. And the reason for that is that I guess those companies are more likely to pay the ransom. And as a result, they will target those companies knowing that they were likely to pay it if they do get compromised. So it becomes a valuable list of targets that they could potentially target in the future. So it's just shows how, you know, things like this just breed more of the same. And that it's kind of and that's how this never-ending cycle just keeps happening, because then now they have that list of insured victims, they attack those, they compromise those, and the cycle continues depending on how involved each of those individual companies are in their own supply chain, right? So,
That's
and then the
why
ransomware in
premiums are
general.
going up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that kind of just shows you too. I think, Sam, to your point, like, you know, like how stuff is really becoming, and like the whole time that type of play. And I think the days of just like, I don't want to say doing it for fun are gone, but you know, there's a much more like methodical approach to, you know, cyber attacks now and what people are really doing. And like, you know, it's really just about monetary. And I mean, heck, you can do ransomware as a service, you know, literally from these companies, and, you know, dark web type stuff. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of sophistication out there around this.
Yeah, the low-level attacker is temporarily seems to be out of the picture, and everything nowadays seems to be a much more sophisticated, thought-out kind of attack. And even the technology itself, right? Like everything is moving to more advanced detection mechanisms, advanced prevention mechanisms, and as a result, the attacks have elevated for the time being. So. I think for that reason, that's also why a lot of companies have kind of moved away from focusing on ransomware, and that's why we're starting to see this kind of spike in that, right? Because the supply chain is a really long game kind of approach, whereas ransomware is a little bit more direct, and as a result of blue teamers focusing on one over the other and recently, you're starting to see that spike back in ransomware, as it's still a very lucrative industry. So yeah, the nature of the threats has definitely changed and is much more advanced.
I agree. That kind of brings us to our last story here. Continuing on with everything is Ubiquiti. I think my headline on this one's pretty interesting, right? Ubiquiti breach catastrophic in nature. So you know, it's pretty widespread, pretty deep. I mean, when you kind of read through it, it sounds like, I mean, literally had to do everything, right? The cloud environment, the databases, customer data, customer networks, the keys.
Yeah,
this one sounds pretty bad.
pretty bad. Yeah.
A lot of customers we know use Ubiquiti, you know, in their networks, and you know, from a cloud managed perspective. And I think this one we're going to be hearing about for a while, right? As more details come out. But interesting is, you know, from what the article kind of, it was more trying to be downplayed in the beginning. It was like, oh, it was a third party, you know, vendor that was breached, and it was like, well, actually, it might have been, you know, technically a third party, you know, meaning Amazon, but you know, again, you still have that shared responsibility to secure the accounts and everything else. So, you know, that kind of falls on you or the customer at that point, not necessarily, you know, these cloud providers. So, this one, you know, more for sure, but you know, just reading through it, it's quite bad.
Yeah, I mean, Ubiquiti makes security cameras, Wi-Fi,
routers,
switches,
switches.
routers.
Yeah,
Go down
everything.
the list. They can have access to quite a bit. Like that's that other Bay Area company that was recently hacked with the cameras. That kind of comes to mind, right? Like they could get into all these high classified areas and whatnot with all of that data. What's going to shake out from this as well long term?
Yeah, and I think they said at least they reported the initial compromise was due to an attacker gaining access to LastPass credentials of a Ubiquiti IT employee. So that brings up a lot of questions, because it's like, well, you know, first of all, why wasn't that individual recycling his passwords and making sure that his credentials weren't compromised? Especially when a password management vendor like LastPass has been involved in a breach. And so it sounds like he never changed his credentials since that breach. So it just kind of brings into question again, like the awareness of employees, and are they following the password safe handling of passwords, but procedures surrounding that. And then again, you know, in Ubiquiti, it doesn't sound like they were enforcing the forced reset of passwords on their accounts either,
Correct.
because even if they had access to the last pass account, why were all the credentials still working for all of the other accounts? So it is likely, you know, there was a little bit of lapse in password management practices on both ends there.
Yeah, well, were they using a personal version of LastPass, the enterprise famous word of the day, MFA?
Right, right.
Yeah, I've been kind of reading through it, right? You know, it also talks about, you know, like lack of, say, logging and a few things like that. And even, you know, if you kind of read the article potentially about, you know, the actual InfoSec team's advice was potentially ignored and like not taken into account too. And this kind of comes back to, hey, you know, do companies try to cover up some of these things or downplay it to protect stock price or shareholder price and things like that? This is kind of a company, and you know, like it looks like their stock did take a hit and then it kind of rose back up, but it'll be interesting to see where it goes or where it stays based on bigger discretion like this. And if, you know, all these companies realize that, hey, remote people have access to my entire network for, you know, months, that's a pretty scary situation to be out there. So yeah, lots more to come on this one, I think, for sure.
Yeah, and to think about the compliance and the legal and all the different ramifications, like trying to take the stance on, oh, it's not a big deal when you know it is possibly a bigger one, can probably have worse ramifications down the road from all of
Yeah.
that. So we'll see how that plays out over the next couple of years.
It kind of reminds me of those, you know, those graphics you see where it's like everything is fine, you know, and like literally the building's on fire around you, kind of a thing. So it's kind of what we're seeing. Yeah, kind of what we're seeing right now in some of these things. So. Awesome. Well, I think that kind of wraps up today's show. You know, thanks for watching. You know, be sure to kind of, you know, comment, like, subscribe, check us out in the various.
Below.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Make
one
sure
of
you
these
stay
directions.
tuned. Yeah, well, somewhere we'll figure it out which way it goes.
That
way everybody can get alerted for future shows. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, it was great chatting with you, and talk to everybody soon.
Thanks,
All right,
guys.
take care.